Hi, everybody, and welcome to Cizzles, the only place to ingest the latest in technology for higher education and related services. Today, I would like to welcome our guest chef, Dr. Allison Leggett from the University of California, and her sous chef. Do you want to introduce yourself and your sous chef, please?
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. I am so happy to be here. My name is Dr. Allison Leggett. I am the program director at UCLA Extension, University of California, Los Angeles. In that program, I oversee all aspects of teacher education, including elementary and secondary, and for those who actually want to do very specialized instruction for English language learners. I'd love to introduce my sous chef, Mr. Edric Leggett.
Hi there, I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to discussing technology and cooking corn cakes.
Well, we're very excited to have both of you here. And so corn cakes, I love corn cakes. So I'm excited about being able to talk about that. But let's talk about our technology first. What technology would you like to talk about tonight?
Well, we're going to talk about distributed ledgers and how it could work within the school system. There's a lot of discussion about technologies and how to improve how well they produce information and transfer data across systems. But today we're going to learn more about how that works.
So can you tell me what are distributed? You said it's distributed ledgers. What is a distributed ledger?
Okay, Mr. Leggett.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to help out. So a distributed ledger, it is a technology, it's a set of technologies that refer to protocols and supporting infrastructure that allows computers spread across a network, whether it be like an intranet, like so within an organization, or using like an external one such as the internet, to spread across the network to access a common database that is decentralized, equitable, and secure, very secure.
Okay, so that's definitely sounds something that we should be interested in when it comes into the school systems. What would you like to tell us about this technology?
Well, we're going to use some analogies. And so if we proceed on with the presentation, we can tell more detail on that. So our agenda today is 3 parts. We're first going to define what distributed ledgers are, their definition, the requirements, and examples. Secondly, we'll look at what is centralized versus distributed systems. Our current educational system is very, very centralized. You could either look at the University of Central Florida, and if you're a faculty member, all information goes into those who have access to University of Central Florida. The same thing with UCLA. Information is passed on within a centralized location. However, in a decentralized or distributed system, it looks a lot differently, and it's actually far more secure. The third element we'll look at is how to use distributed ledgers, and we'll look at examples using cases. So let's first define what a distributed ledger is. A distributed ledger is a database that is shared across a network. Well, let's think about it. I know here in California, we have multitude of cell phone systems. We also use a multitude of cable systems, and some people in their television, they use satellite dishes. So all of those are networks, and they all have a central location. Well, let's think about how that could be decentralized. So in a distributed ledger, one that is a database across a network, the ledger stores information of an asset. Well, in education, let's think about what an asset is. Many times we think of an asset as being our students. Obviously, our students are our number one asset, right? They do well in school, then we're very, very proud. But assets can also be properties such as transcripts and grades, which is also very vital. So an example of an asset that we'll use through this presentation is a transcript, which stores information of their academic record. It stores whether they have taken a course, whether they have passed the course, what grade they got, how many units that they got for the course, and how much they have proceeded forward in getting their degree or their certificate. Any type of updates on that are called transactions. So think of a transcript and it has data on it or assets of these students' grades or progress toward their degree. And every time that student takes a new course, that's a transaction. So those transactions refer to updating the transcripts. There are 3 elements that are required for distributed ledger. These requirements make a distributed ledger run smoothly. So we have to make sure there is peer-to-peer networking. That's where participants in a network share their tasks. Now, here's an educational example. Educators in a school, they co-develop lesson plans. So in, let's say, 4th grade, and you may have a 4th grade lead teacher, and that 4th grade lead teacher gathers together the other 4th grade teachers and talks about what day of the week and how many hours they're going to agree to teach reading. So the reason why you have that peer-to-peer networking in a school is so that a parent doesn't say, well, Mrs. S's class, they do more reading in that class than Mr. W's class. So there's that peer-to-peer networking that happens. The 4th grade teachers get together and they all say the same number of minutes a week. They may use the same curriculum that time of the day. They may use the same books. They may use the same exams and assessments. So all of that is called peer networking. Another example that's not necessarily education-based is imagine yourself as a college student and you are sharing a dorm with someone else, with others. Well, even in sharing a dorm, you have to have a peer-to-peer networking or quote unquote understanding. So in shared room of a dormitory, there might be a need to decide, okay, who washes dishes a particular day of the week, who takes the garbage out, etc. And the second requirement is called the authentication methodology. Each ledger update needs the user's e-signature. That's very important, isn't it? When you think about tasks for a roommate, you may say, well, there's that verbal understanding that my friend, Mr. S, can take the garbage out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Well, sometimes when you talk verbally with others, it may not necessarily be clearly understood by both parties, but a safer way to ensure that both parties understand that is to get an e-signature. So that e-signature is the second part of the authentication. So first part is that there has to be this understanding of tasks. Participants in a network have their shared tasks. And the second part is authenticating it with a signature. Just like in education, each transcript must be signed by the registrar, or in the middle of a student getting their credentials or getting their degree, they may have to show their school district that they're on their way to getting their certification. So they get a signature on their transcripts from the registrar to say, these are official transcripts. We don't
So
want
you're
to-
saying, so just so I understand, the distributed ledger then is the place that all of this information is stored and shared among different people
Absolutely.
and different groups.
Absolutely. Now,
Okay.
yeah, and currently there's not a distributed in institutions of higher education, as well as LEAs, the learning educational institutes. There's only within a school site.
Right.
Only
So
a
I know
school
that here
yeah.
at UCF, especially with things like transcripts, we have to be very careful of how we are sharing that information, who is able to see that information, and who has access to be able to change that information. So as you're thinking about that so that peer-to-peer networking, the transcripts would be able to be shared among the students, but they can't go in and change anything. That has to be signed off by the registrars and, any other administrative offices. So then that's where that authentication portion comes in.
It has to. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm with you so far. I'm not sure. I've got an idea in my head of how it kind of works.
You got it. One last element, the transaction verification methodology, where the participants in the network each have a consensus. What does that mean? Well, if you think about that roommate element, think about the roommates, and something kind of funny that happens with adults is that their friends stay over, right? So sometimes their friend may want to stay over, or they may have this idea that, we can have, roommate one wants to have a party or have their friends over on Friday nights. And roommate number two wants to have their parties on Saturday nights, no matter what. Well, that's what's called that shared consensus. There has to be this consensus. And in a bigger network, you're looking at tens of hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, but there is that shared decision making that has happened anytime there's that change. So an example in the school system that I actually worked on in one of my master's degrees was developing a textbook approval process. Because in the past, at least in my school district, the department chair alone made the decision on the textbook. They took a look at the textbook and they realized, okay, it's a little bit better than the previous years, ta-da-da-da. They made the decision on that. Whereas now there might be more of that decision making. So I use that as an example that textbooks having that shared decision making on adoption of that.
And if we go back to the transcripts, it would be between the professor and making sure that the grade is input correctly, and then the registrar's office making sure that everything else is done correctly to say that this transcript is okay. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. I think I'm still there.
You're doing well.
If you want, Christine, I could give you a few more examples as well.
Okay. How about one more?
One more? Okay. So that third point for transaction verification, think of that like a jury. So in a court case. So
okay.
Just like the whole group of jurors have to agree on a verdict, like guilty or not guilty, in this, for distributed ledgers, all of the participants have to agree on, instead of a verdict, a consensus. Like we all agree that this transcript is the accurate one. Okay.
All right. So you're in a distributed ledger. Everyone can share their tasks. It's across a network, but because of the application, it's also very secure, and that we can all agree on the information that's input into it. Got it. Okay. What's next?
Well, let's look at an example of the transcript on what's called a blockchain. And let's look at it as 4 parts. So the first part is called the Genesis block. And that's where you place as a transaction. That transaction is that very first course in the sequence. In the second block, now it moves along the chain. The second block, it has that second course, but it's hashed, or as we might recognize it, hashtagged back to the first course. And when it's hashed onto the first course, it is seen as, in order for it to be validated as a second course, that first course has to be on the ledger or in the blockchain.
Okay.
And it proceeds on from that. The third block would be the third course, and it's hashed to the second, which obviously could not have been validated without the first. And then the fourth validates back to the third.
So this could be an example of that, something that you would use for different semesters, like the first block would be semester 1, But then the second block has different information, but it's the same course. So that might be semester 2. Am I right there? Or am I off? So they're all connected. They're all kind of the same courses, but they have different information for each one. But because the information, like the number of students changes or the students change, then that would change the course. So instead of saying the course is the next semester, we're just calling them blocks. But we know that they're related.
Yes, if I may jump in, I believe we may have lost Dr. Leggett. Well, I think she's back, but for the first block, so just like a distributed ledger stores information, imagine the first block stores all the information in the first semester, right?
Okay.
The second block has information from the second semester, but that's
Okay.
only if the first semester was completed. So blockchain uses a technology called hashing. It's a function, mathematics and cryptology.
Okay.
So just like a course prerequisite refers to a prior course, hashing references a prior block. So
Got it.
a hash is like think of a signature. It's like, oh, block 1 has been completed. Semester 1 has been completed. This is semester 2. And you know semester 2 because it's got the hash of semester 1. You know
Perfect.
semester 3 because it's the hash of semester 2, et cetera, et cetera.
I've got it. It's making so much more sense to me now than it has before. Thank you. So when people talk about blockchains, they also talk about NFTs or non-fungible tokens. So how is that related?
Oh, I'd be happy to step in, Dr. Leggett.
Yes, sure.
So the key value with NFTs is the ability to certify authenticity, to certify that one asset, a particular asset, is the only one of its kind and belongs to one person or one entity. So educators can use NFTs to, let's say, permanently link a student to their diploma and ensure no one else can claim that diploma. So if you have 2 students going to UCLA and one of them drops out, you don't want both of them to claim, you don't want student A who successfully graduated to say, oh, this is my diploma, it's for biology. And you don't want student B to also say and lie and say that that is their diploma. Like, let's say they have the same name. If you put the diploma on an NFT, you can permanently tie it to student A instead of student B. So if they're both named.
So I was going to say, then also, if I wanted to check someone's diploma, if it was indeed linked to them with an NFT, that would guarantee that person, like they would give me the NFT information and I could say, okay, I can see that you own this diploma.
Exactly.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So it allows you to establish provenance. So if you, with an NFT, with one NFT or a set of NFTs, you will be able to prove that I am John Doe, who went to this elementary school, this middle school, this high school, this undergrad, this graduate program, et cetera. That whole provenance, an NFT can prove that. It is
cool.
A unique identifier. Right now, people use NFTs for all sorts of things, especially art and all of that stuff. But that's the first step in the whole process. NFTs are a very fascinating technology. So, there's certainly a lot of hype around it, but yes, that would be an example.
And a lot of confusion. So that's why I'm glad we're talking about it.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And
all right, what's next?
I think these are our case uses, right? Oh, more on the difference between centralized and distributed systems. So when we look at the centralized system, we're really trusting that system. What we call are bad actors, or those that are malicious administrators, or it could be a malicious parent or a malicious student, malicious teacher. They could emerge and actually create havoc in school systems. We've heard of ransomware. We've heard of hacking. Some of our students, especially in high school, are much smarter than the teachers are. Couldn't you imagine them hacking the system and changing grades? And so with that, it's number one, it's difficult to track. And then two, let's say if it was a professional, let's say if it was an administrator, there's a due process that they're protected. There's a long process to remove them from that role, to remove their access from that system. And who knows the type of things that could happen without that removal. I'll also share with you that in the event that there was some maliciousness from one administrator, let's say to a teacher, for instance, we'd hate for that to happen, but let's say if there was, that maliciousness could follow that teacher. And that's unfortunate because that's the way that centralized system was set up in that way. So we wouldn't, that is that drawback of the centralized system.
Right.
In addition, there's that single point of failure. So that's why ransomware works so well. That's why even in the hospitals, I know here in Los Angeles, a major hospital was hacked, and it opened up obviously a lot of lawsuits for hospitals because regular people and even those that are popular entertainers did not want their personal information exposed. But if a person who has that type of technology can go in knowing that one weak spot, then it's a system that is set up that way. On the other hand, with distributed ledgers, could you share more about that, Edric, on distributed ledgers?
Sure. So with centralized ledgers, a bad actor can corrupt the system or the system administrator, so the one person. Distributed ledgers, you'd have to corrupt the majority of the network. With centralized ledgers, a bad actor can censor other participants, so they can discriminate against coworkers and people underneath them. With a distributed ledger, all participants can have equal power and privilege. Back to the centralized, whereas there's a single point of failure, so all of those ransomware attacks. With distributed ledgers, each participant has a full copy of the ledger, so it ensures validity and resiliency. Now, I'm getting kind of hungry, Dr. Leggett. Should we get started on those corn cakes?
Sure.
That sounds like.
Go ahead.
That sounds like a great idea. And I'm sure there's more to talk about this topic. And I just wanted to ask, how can we think about our higher ed faculty and related services? What should they be preparing their students for in terms of using these distributed ledgers?
I'd be happy to take that on. So here's a couple quick use cases that faculty can use and students can use. So imagine diplomas that outlive their awarding institutions. So let's say you have a school and they lose their accreditation. In fact, it's worse than that. They go out of business. With diplomas existing on a distributed ledger, even though that awarding institution is out of business, is gone, that diploma is still there. And as long as the network exists, which effectively would be as long as academia itself exists, people will be able to prove that this diploma exists. For students, if a student is transferring to a new college, instead of spending 48 hours, 72 hours transferring their official transcripts, the institution would simply log on to the distributed ledger and instantly tell that, oh yes, so-and-so did go to this school. Here's the transcript. It's instant. And then tuition payments for distributed ledgers and blockchains. I'm sure many of you have heard of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Well, a promise of that, when it's eventually worked out, of course, is that unbanked and underbanked students can pay schools directly without banks. So if you're in an area of the world that doesn't have a strong banking system or a corrupt banking system, you would use distributed ledgers to transfer value. Bitcoin is a value transfer system, so you could transfer value directly to the school and pay your tuition there.
Talking about this topic and how it can be utilized in education. But you're right, I'm a little hungry too, and I'm excited about these corn cakes. So I believe, so you have a video of your corn cakes. Is there anything that you want to talk about it first?
Well, yeah, we can think about distributed ledgers like making corn cakes. And you think about the centralized system. In the centralized system, everything has one, like there's that one weak link. Whereas in the distributed ledger, you have the multitude of combinations of participants and the agreement of where things should go at a particular time. Edric,
And how does that relate to the corn cakes?
Yeah. Edric, would you like to add more?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So just as with the corn cakes, each participant in a distributed ledgers network works best as part of a team, or in the corn cakes case, part of a delicious meal, right? So corn cakes is one aspect. So each participant in a network is one aspect of this great network. A corn cake being a great aspect of a delicious meal. Each distributed ledger has a bit of wiggle room with the recipe as well, just as with the corn cakes, which Dr. Leggett will shortly describe. Just measuring a little bit extra of this, a little bit less of that.
Okay.
So you could build distributed ledgers with different recipes. So one
Okay.
distributed ledger can be public, like Bitcoin, or private, like an academic institution probably should have their student records private. So you could change the recipe. So I would say those are a couple ways to link corn cakes with distributed ledgers.
Okay, good. I like that. I'm thinking about when you're talking about the students too, like it might be interesting having IEPs on a distributed ledger that will follow students from place to place. So that'd be an interesting topic.
That
But
would
now,
be amazing. Yes.
yeah. But now we're going to talk about corn cakes. So I'm going to play your video.
My name is Dr. Allison Leggett, and I'm here to cook Southern fried corn cakes.
The ingredients for today's country Southern corn cakes are 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of white sugar, but today we'll use confectioner's sugar, which will work perfectly. 3/4 cup of boiling water. We want to make sure the water is nice and hot. And a cup of oil or grease. So I've placed my oil, I'm just using vegetable oil, in my iron skillet. And actually this is a tradition in my family to use an iron skillet. It's important not only for cooking and maintaining the heat, but also when you use acidic foods, the iron actually absorbs into the food. So as this is heating up, I'm also heating up my water, making sure that it is boiling to ensure the lightest and fluffiest corn cakes possible. So now let's measure 1 cup of cornmeal. This cornmeal actually has a history with my family. I actually remember my grandmother using this with this recipe. So we need to measure out 1 cup. And we could just place it here. We also need to measure out 1 teaspoon of salt. And 1 teaspoon of sugar. Some like to put the spoon actually into the sugar box. I prefer to just pour it out over another bowl so that it doesn't contaminate what's in that cup. Now you may notice that I'm actually kind of doing approximations, so it might be a little less or a little more, which is perfectly fine. Well, now that the water has boiled, we need to quickly pour the water in. I'll set this down for a moment. And stir, 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 stir until it's perfectly in a lovely mush. Doesn't that look delicious? So that we don't have too many clumps. I stopped pouring all of the water just to kind of make sure all of this was stirred nicely and smoothly. Also keeping my eye on the oil, and add the rest of the water. Doesn't that look delicious? Nice and smooth, almost like a cake batter, right? Now the consistency actually could be a little thicker if you want thicker corn cakes, but I think this will be perfectly fine. Now, we want to check that the oil is hot. So I often do like my grandmother did, just like a little sample to see. Ah, did you hear that sizzle? That means it's perfect. So as you see, I'm using quite a wide spoon for each of the corn cakes. So let's use this for one of them. This for a second one. This for a third one. And maybe a fourth. Listen to that delightful sizzle. We do want to periodically check that they're not sticking, and these look perfect. So I'm keeping them cooking until I see more of a brown tone on the bottom or around the sides. And don't be afraid if they break up just a little bit. That looks really good. Let's see if the next one is done. Things look up just a little bit, but that's okay. So while your corn cakes are cooking, you do want to prepare a plate to absorb the excess oil. So I have a clean plate here. I generally use paper towels. They look like they're done. They're nice and brown. So let's take them out. Delicious. And just to add a little color, you can add some Old Bay seasoning. And ta-da! Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoy the recipe on the country corn cakes.
That was great. No, that looks delicious. And it looks something that at least I could understand.
I do apologize, Christine. My computer lagged a little bit. May you please repeat?
Oh, sure. I was just saying how great that what you talked about with your distributed ledger.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm still experiencing some issues. I'll see if I can troubleshoot on my end.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's just, you know, what I think what Christine is saying is that, you know, connecting the corn cakes to distributed ledgers is a unique way to have schools and school districts and even institutions of higher education really kind of break bread to understand that that's a possibility. So would you like to add any more to that, Edric?
No, I think the break bread was a beautiful phrase to use as well, right there. No, I'm in complete agreement.
And the fact that your cooking was sizzling for Cizzles just makes me so happy. We were sizzling
Yes.
tonight for sure. So,
Yes.
well, I know this is a very complex topic. Not the corn cakes; those just looked amazing. Very simple, and I know I'll be able to do that. And you know, I was thinking too that this recipe you got from your grandmother, and that was passed on. So it's almost the same as the distributed ledger. I think that we have information and we can pass it on securely and know that it's in good hands as we move forward. So I think there's a lot of value. And when we talk about these things, you know, part of our mission here at CIDDL is to prepare future educators and the related services that go along with education. And even though these things are not being used widely now, they will be for our students. So we really need to make sure that we understand where the future is going so that we can prepare our students. So I think that when we look at the blockchain and look at distributed ledgers, it is something that we need to make sure that our pre-service teachers are understanding, because they're going to be using it in their jobs. You know, when we think about transcripts and IEPs and information that needs to be securely passed on, just as your recipe was, then it is a very important subject, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And I'll share another example. I noticed that in vocational schools, for instance, nursing schools in particular, that sometimes those do shut down, especially during the pandemic. I do know of a few that did shut down. And with that, what happened to the transcripts? If you don't have that centralized location, the student who's looking to transfer says, well, yeah, I was there, but this institute isn't there any longer. And I assure you, I attended. So unless they had some previously hand documented in their hands official transcripts, the other institutions are literally just going to be guessing. Is kind of a guessing game. And it's really unfortunate. And that's just one of many examples, but that's just one that I cannot get over because I work in higher education. Right. I do know that students have to transfer from other institutions. And what does happen, because I'm also in for the California Department of Education, I'm part of the accreditation, or I sit on accreditation reviews. And, you know, yes, there are many that pass and there are some that have, you know, as we call stipulations. And I'm sure that there are a few that say, well, no stipulations, we will not accredit you. Right, and what happens to those that graduated 20 years ago? If they wanted to come back and get their credential from now a non-accredited, that's not fair. It was accredited 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Well, thank you so much for this presentation. I know that I understand it a little bit more. I know that there's more to learn, but isn't that why we're all here? So, and the corn cakes were amazing. So, Edric, thank you so much. Allison, it was great to see you, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in more information about this topic, please go to CIDDL.org and join our community there. We can have a great conversation, I'm sure, about this topic and many others. And stay tuned for more CIDDL Cizzles coming up soon. CEC is coming up. We'll be there with our chef hats and aprons on. So if you're planning on attending CEC, please stop by and see us. Thank you again and have a good evening.